Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our third seminar presentation for this semester. We are in week 4 and we are on the topic, is China a security threat? That's the main question. Topic is China as a security threat and our perspective as Papua New Guineans. We started off with talking about security as a concept, and it's a concept that is defined differently, and the important thing is us understanding what security is and the various security threats that are posed by not only state actors but non-state actors as well. And we talked about non-traditional security threats like pandemics and now the geopolitics of oil and all that. So now we're going to focus more on one particular security threat that is widely discussed in the media, in different academic literature, and that is the threat of China. China as a rising power and its impact on the international system and establish political powers or powerful countries within the international system that we currently have. So to further the discussion, we have our 7 groups and we have assigned to them the 7 different questions. And they're all related to China and what China is doing in the country and in the region, Pacific region. And at the end of the 2 weeks, you're expected to decide for yourself whether China is a threat to Papua New Guinea, to the entire international system, or China is just another country like PNG looking for its place in the world, and now it will work with others to develop its own country as well as help all of humanity. So without further delay, we'll start off with our first group, Group 6. Group 6 will be represented by Ms. Mileg and Ms. Ulalo. Please go ahead. The virtual microphone is yours.
Morning, everyone. On behalf of Group 6, Gabriela and I will present on the statement and question. Zhang's research suggests that civil society stakeholders hold nuanced views about China's Belt and Road Initiative and foreign aid. How can these stakeholders influence their government's decision to ensure that Chinese-led projects align with local needs and long-term sustainability goals? According to Zhang's research, China is a significant rising power. Its strengths rest largely upon its economic power and opportunities for partner countries in areas like aid, trade, and investments. The Belt and Road Initiative, according to Green Finance and Development Center, the Belt and Road Initiative is China's main initiative it's intention. China's main intentions, cooperation, and economic strategy. The BRI was launched in 2013 by Chinese President Jinping. So the BRI has extended to the Pacific Islands, and the Chinese aid BRI has extended to the Pacific Islands, and the Chinese aid is a major tool for China to promote its influence. So according to Zhang 2017, Pacific Island countries sees opportunities in China's BRI, but face 2 main challenges. First one is BRI is still in its early stages with many details and rules yet to be developed, making it hard for Pacific Island countries to fully benefit. Secondly, the Pacific is not a priority reason for the initiative, as China is more focused on areas where large-scale projects like railways are possible. This leaves Pacific Island countries with limited attention and tailored opportunities under the BRI. Moving on to local perception of China by civil societies. The local perceptions of China by civil society actors are nuanced at best, and it reveals severe concerns in some areas. Pacific scholars seem to have a more positive view of China. They are more supportive of the China-Pacific relations and less concerned about the threat a fully developed China may pose to the region. Pacific NGOs are most critical of China. Most of them don't support the Belt and Road Initiative. And lastly, Pacific Islanders view China's views about China tend to be more positive regarding benefits in economic development, poverty reduction, and knowledge transfer, while there are concerns about human rights, democracy, environmental impact, a lack of job opportunities for locals, and the dumping of Chinese goods.
Now, from the article by Chen, we have found there are several risks, but we only took out four risk challenges that China has posed on the Pacific Island countries. The first one is the debt risk or debt traps. And both PNG and Sweden students expressed their negative views about the Chinese aid, and China deliberately set debt traps for the Pacific. And Pacific NGOs, they have a range of serious concerns about Chinese aid with respect to the debt issue, and argued that Chinese aid has led growing debt risk in their countries. And the second one is the Chinese economic monopoly, which regarding the small businesses and retailers. So Chinese companies and individuals are significant investors in the resource extraction and retail across the Pacific. This is taken from Chang's article. However, Pacific NGOs are concerned about local enterprises' inability to compete with Chinese businesses, the clash of culture, and the erosion of traditional culture. And also Tongan NGOs argue that their country is being used by Chinese retailers as an easy market to dump China-made low-quality goods. The third risk is the lack of job opportunities for locals. And majority of the surveyed Pacific NGOs, they indicated that, and they believe that Chinese contractors tend to use China's workers in their projects for the convenience of communication and management. And their views, they think that the use of large number of Chinese workers and building materials means or results in fewer job and business opportunities for the Pacific Islanders. Okay, the last one is the erosion of Pacific Island sovereignty. And this, some NGOs elaborated on their concerns that China have issue of exploiting resources. And an example is from the Chang's article. A village co-shop owned by a Fijian woman was sold to a Chinese couple who disregard religious beliefs, and their religious beliefs to open shop on Sunday. So NGOs commented now that belief system of the village is at risk of intrusion because Fijian began to earn money for land, and they start working and start selling or leasing more land. So to answer the question, how stakeholders can influence their government's decision, we have stated three main points here. So the first point is to influence strategies. Specific stakeholders must influence governments to set guidelines through the Pacific Island Forum for foreign businesses to contribute to local employment by reducing reliance on imported Chinese labor and increase jobs for local workers. And as policymakers, they have more responsibility to take the risk in their countries' relation with China and take the relationship with China more seriously and have more capability to encourage policy changes. Now, the second one is promote fair market competition. Stakeholders must advocate for policies that prevent Chinese small businesses from crowding out local enterprises to ensure equal access to markets and resources. And that is because the focus of the economic interests of the Pacific Islanders, it exposed to the growing number of projects built by Chinese contractors and the use of Chinese workforce. And our last point is the promoting transparency and accountability. Civil society stakeholders must encourage governments to publish loan agreements and project details so that citizens understand their repayment obligations, and also to work on disclosing loan terms, project contracts, and environmental impact assessments to reduce the risk of debt dependency. Because the lack of transparency persists as a main challenge for recipient government officials and the general public to understand Chinese aid. Thank you. And that's the end of our presentation.
All right, thank you, Tomas, Dalal, and Gabriela, for your time and for representing your group to share with us your answers. I believe your PS will have a lot of things to say in regards to the points that you have mentioned. So I leave that to the discussion in the discussion forum for this week and next week. So thank you, Group 4. We now move on to the next group. Thank you, Group 6. We now move on to the next group, which is Group 4. And Group 4 will be represented by Ms. Manda and Mr. Ivan. So Anthony and Emmanuel, please go ahead.
For me and Anthony, I will be presenting our question reads. Wesley Smith and Smith argued that the Pacific Islands are caught in a crossfire of great power competition. So how can Pacific Island states, including PNG, leverage the strategic competition between China and Western powers to their advantage without compromising their sovereignty? So to better understand and answer the question, we have divided the question and statements. So I will be elaborating on the statements while Anthony will answer the question. So the statement is, Wesley Smith and Smith argued that the Pacific Islands are caught in a crossfire of great power competition. And what is power competition? So according to Lopez 2019, a great power competition is when large nations contest for the greatest. So as I mentioned, the strategic competition between China and the United States in the Pacific began gradually in the mid-2000s as China expanded its economic presence, but it intensified significantly from 2017 onward and became highly visible after the 2002 Solomon Islands Security Agreement. So with China, in which Solomon Islands signed an agreement to allow China to establish a military base in the country. So now this development directly challenged long-established defense planning in the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, which aimed at denying rival powers the ability to project military power by sea or air across the surrounding Pacific region. So since that point on, competition with China has been openly acknowledged by the USA and Australia, and they have increased their presence in the Pacific region, coming in with their own strategic plans and engagements to limit China's influence and sway the Pacific Island countries to their side. For example, the recent NRL bid for the PNG to join the NRL is a clear strategic move by Australia to strengthen its traditional bonds with PNG and limit China's own influence in the country. So the current geopolitical situation of the Pacific really shows great power competition because both players are competing for a foothold in the Pacific, where China is utilizing loans, construction projects, and telecommunication investments to build strategic relationships, while Western powers respond with counter investments and strategic partnership to prevent China from getting too much influence in the region. With that, I now leave the mic over to Antonia to answer the question.
To answer the question, how can Pacific To answer the question, how can Pacific Island states, including PNG, leverage the strategic competition between China and Western powers to their advantage without compromising their sovereignty? So, through reading the scholars' research, Wesley Smith basically supports China's power or power-hungry rise in and interest in Oceania by stating that China's rise offers island states opportunities that are not available under established structures of power. Now, one way for the Pacific Island states to use this competition to leverage without harming their own sovereignty is to use the expanding options to negotiate better deals, where Wesley Smith shows that China's presence introduces alternative sources of aid, investment, and diplomatic recognition, which reduces dependence on traditional Western donors. Another one is maintain sovereignty through non-alignment and Pacific-led agendas. He adds on by emphasizing that Pacific states should rely on their own strategic visions like the Blue Pacific agenda rather than framing China's role through Western threat narratives. So the Blue Pacific agenda basically means it is a collective regional identity and political framework adopted by Pacific Island states through the Pacific Islands Forum, and its main goals are to strengthen regionalism and assert Pacific sovereignty and agency. Another way to protect the Pacific Island sovereignty by leveraging in this competition is to demand respect for sovereignty and equality from all partners. So Pacific governments, including PNG, can insist that all partners adopt approaches aligned with the bold declaration values, which are sovereignty, human security, and climate priorities. And the last one is to maintain neutrality with the competing powers while accepting selective benefits. For example, Pacific states can accept infrastructure funding from China while still maintaining security cooperation with Australia and Japan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Antonia, and also thank you, Emmanuel, for representing your group number 4. Let's listen to group 1. Group 1 is represented by Ms. Maclay and Ms. Batinga. Laurel and Esther, please go ahead. With your microphone is yours. But if you have any questions or comments for Esther, for Emmanuel and Antonia, please share in our discussion forum for this week, week 4.
Laurel and I will be presenting on behalf of the Group 1 based on the question statement and the questions. So the question is, MADBOB discusses the on-ground tension with Chinese traders in PNG. How do these tensions highlight the potential for social conflict, and what implications do they have for viewing China's economic presence as a security threat? I have broken the questions into parts for easier analysis. Firstly, I will define the on-the-ground tensions and then we'll continue from there. So according to MADBOB 2021, in the China Alternative Changing Regional Order in the Pacific Islands, on-the-ground tensions refers to the economic and social frictions between Chinese traders and local communities in PNG. These tensions emerge These tensions emerge from competing small retail markets, unfair business practices, cultural differences, and weak state regulations. Instead of focusing on a higher level political or strategic issues, Madbo breaks down how Chinese presence is experienced through everyday interactions in the local markets. He argues that this competition and the resulting perceptions of inequality influences how local communities view China's growing role in the PNG. So based on the reading, we have identified some tensions, and put them into themes. And they are economic competition, weak governance and corruption, law and order challenges, environmental disputes, ethnic stereotyping, and illicit trading. So according to economic competition, Chinese migrants enter small retail and trade stores, locals stating they cannot compete with Chinese dominance in kaibas and wholesale shops, indigenous businesses selling or leasing to Chinese traders, and administration of the Chinese work hectic, and growing resentment. Under the weak governance and corruption, abuse of work permit system, bribery of immigration officials, parliamentary injury, exposing corruption, illegal migrants protected by senior officials, limited state capacity to deport offenders. For the law and order challenges, there are armed robberies and killings of Chinese shop owners, Chinese shops installing steel grids, razor wires, CCTV armed police escorts for cash transfers, and body searches for customers. For the environmental disputes from the reading, Ramonical case, it states slurry spill, controversy, claims of toxic contamination, health and safety concerns, and community opposition to environmental practices. For the ethnic stereotyping, the use of words like Saipo and Kong Kong, and media portrayal like in Chinese, linking Chinese to corruption. For the illicit trading, counterfeit goods such as food, beer, branded items, etc., pirated music affecting local artists, smuggling of cigarettes, drugs, and weapons, and weak inspection of shipping containers. Now leave it to Laurel to further explain the questions.
Thank you, Esther. So to our question, we've divided it into two parts. So the first one, how do these tensions highlight the potential of social conflicts? Yes. So first of all, from the reading, So first of all, we'll define social conflict. So social conflict refers to tension or disagreement or a struggle between groups of society due to differences in interests, values, power, resources, and or identity. Now back to these tensions. Yes, these tensions, they show a strong potential for social conflicts because they affect everyday life and the livelihoods of Papua New Guineans. So for instance, according to Matt Bob, the first one is economic competition. Now, economic competition, it creates a resentment among local traders who feel that displaced or unable to compete with the Chinese counterparts. So the second competition is weak governance or corruption. So it undermines many Papua New Guineans' trust in state institutions, and it creates perceptions that Chinese actors are protected unfairly. To the third point, under the tensions is law and order challenges. So law and order challenges increase fear among communities and Chinese businesses. The next one is environmental disputes, where it threatens the livelihoods of PNG's people and it creates anger over time. To the other point is ethnic stereotype. So ethnic stereotyping. So this turns economic frustrations into name calling. Now the last point is illicit trade. It loses its trust and credibility according to the public perceptions. With all of these tensions, it clearly demonstrates the frustration. That frustration can emerge from these tensions among the public that can result in violence, protest, social conflicts among Papua New Guineans and the Chinese traders. Thank you. That answers the first part of the question. Now moving on to the second part, it reads, what implications do they have for viewing China's economic presence as a security threat? Now, these tensions, they suggest that Chinese economic presence may create internal security risk among PNG and Chinese traders. PNG traders and Chinese traders. So, for example, according to the reading, Madbob 2021, it does not argue that Chinese does not pose a military or strategic security threat, but instead, it explains that these tensions arise at a societal level. Now, for instance, weak governance allows corruption, which encourages illegal activities to rise, and having a weak government with economic dependence increases the chance of being vulnerable to a more dominant country. Moreover, Madbob's analysis showed that such tensions or problems emerge from having a weak structural governance and not China. Now to conclude, so these underground tensions show that China's economic presence can create local conflicts in economic competition, corruption, and inequality or not properly managed. Now, the security risks are societal rather than military, emerging from a weaker governance system and not from China itself. Thank you. This leads us to the end of our presentation. These are references. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Drew, Laurel, and Esther, and your group as well, Group 1, for sharing with us your answers to the questions given. I believe your peers have picked up interesting points where they can further expand in our discussion on Moodle. So we now move on to the third or fourth presenters representing group number 3. We have Ms. Mase and Ms. Daton.
Just go to share.
Good morning once again, Mr. Aguirre and everyone. So for me and my groupmate Cleo, that one will be representing group 3. So our question for this week is, it reads, Zhang highlights that Pacific Islanders perceive China as both a development partner and a source of concern due to issues like debt, sovereignty, and governance. How can Pacific Island nations navigate these dual perceptions to maximize benefits from Chinese engagement while safeguarding their political and economic independence? So this is our short introduction. Our introduction reads, Zhang's analysis shows that most of the Pacific Island countries view China as a valuable development partner, but also as a potential risk to sovereignty, governance, and long-term economic independence. China is a rising power whose strengths rest largely upon its economic power and opportunities for partner countries in areas like aid, trade, and investment. The challenge for Pacific governments is therefore not whether to engage with China, but also how to manage that government strategically. So to answer this question, we came up with 3 points. I will be talking on the first point. I will be presenting on the first point, while my friend Cleo will be presenting on our second and third point. So our first point is adopting a strategic balancing approach. Pacific Island states should avoid relying heavily on a single partner, such as China, Australia, or the United States. Countries such as PNG, Fiji, and Samoa maintain diversified diplomatic and economic partnerships and negotiate from a position of strength. This works by increasing bargaining power, reducing vulnerability to political pressure, preventing dependency syndrome. So, for example, PNG not only has partnership engagements with China, but also with Australia, Japan, and multilateral institutions like the Asian Development Bank. This strategy helps PNG secure better financing terms. Pacific Island countries should maintain balanced foreign relations by continuing the traditional friends to all, enemies to none policy. Thank you.
Moving on to our second point. Strengthening debt management and transparency. So debt concerns are central to discussions about debt trap diplomacy to avoid unsustainable debt. Pacific governments should adopt practical measures such as conducting independent debt sustainability assessments, making loan agreements publicly transparent, strengthening oversight mechanisms to prevent unfavorable deals. Weak governance and opaque contracts make nations more vulnerable. Therefore, transparency and parliamentary oversight are essential. Diversifying financing sources is also important. So Pacific Island countries should engage with multilateral banks such as the Asian Development Bank and World Bank as Australia and Japan. Multilateral development banks still provide the majority of loans in the Pacific and often offers more concessional terms. That's according to Raja and others 2019. So in addition, government should prioritize productive investments. Focus should be placed on projects that generate revenue, such as transport, energy, and fisheries, rather than prestige or symbolic projects. Many Chinese investments in PNG are concentrated in transport and energy, which can be beneficial if properly managed. By strengthening
debt management, and ensuring productive use of loans, Pacific nations can reduce financial risks while still benefiting from Chinese infrastructure investment. On to our third point, regional cooperation and so Pacific Islands are smaller in power when they are on their own, but powerful when they collaborate together. So these collaborations can be through regional forums like the Pacific Island Forum, where countries can discuss important agendas, loan terms, infrastructure standards, and developing infrastructure strategies. So China is a rising power. Its strengths rest largely upon its economic power and opportunities for partner countries in areas like aid, trade, and investment. So other countries' perceptions of China is different from the Pacific Island nations. The literature suggests that developing countries' views about China are not dichotomous or simply view China as either a threat or a chance for growth or an opportunity, but nuanced. So to conclude, Pacific Islanders perceive China as both a development partner and a source of concern. China offers opportunities in infrastructure, trade, and investment, but there are legitimate worries about debt sustainability, governance, sovereignty, and local economic impact. So to navigate these dual perceptions, Pacific Island nations should adopt a strategic balancing approach, strengthening debt management and transparency, diversifying financing sources, prioritize productive investments, promote regional cooperation, and carefully regulate foreign business activities. So in doing so, Pacific Island countries can maximize the benefits of China engagement while safeguarding their political autonomy, economic independence, and cultural integrity. That's all, and these are our references. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jello and Rosemary, for representing your group 3. We move on to group 5. Group 5 will be represented by Joe and Simone. The virtual microphone is yours. Group 5.
Yogara, can you guys hear me? Okay, so me and Simone are representing group 5, and we'll be answering the question which was assigned to us, which states, Kabu Taulaka emphasizes the importance of the Blue Pacific narrative in fostering regional solidarity amongst growing external interest. How can Pacific Island leaders utilize this narrative to resist the pressure of great power competition, particularly between China and the West? So to better understand the question and answer the question, we have divided the question into 2 parts, where I'll be focusing on the background of the Blue Sea narrative and the importance of the Blue Sea narrative, and Simone will be answering the second part of the question. So back in 2017, during the 48 Pacific Islands Forum, Pacific Island leaders endorsed the Blue Pacific narrative as a guiding vision to combat external pressure. During the forum, leaders were urged to embrace this concept, which aims to use the ocean to drive social, cultural, political, and economical change while promoting regional unity. The Blue Pacific serves as the main focus for collective action under the framework for the Pacific regionalism adopted in 2014. So the Pacific Island leaders recognized its importance in building shared identity and emphasized the role of the ocean in shaping the future of the Pacific nations together. So as stated in the reading, Kabuto Laka states, and I quote, the Pacific Islands, the Blue Pacific narrative places the Pacific Ocean at the center of the Pacific Island countries' identity and interconnections, end quote. So this offers a powerful counter-narrative to portray the region not as fragmented small islands, but as a collective blue continent, which shares interests and responsibilities. So this reframing helps Pacific Island leaders resist being defined solely by great power strategy, interest, and instead put the region's own priorities first. Cabo Taulaka also argues that the Blue Pacific is both a narrative and a strategy used by Pacific Island leaders to assert agency in a geopolitical context dominated by external powers. He also explains that Pacific Island countries develop this narrative in response to geopolitical maps, such as the Indo-Pacific and the Maritime Silk Road, which we don't have a lot of time to explain, so feel free to comment and question on that. And yeah, as I've stated, the narrative pushes back on the geopolitical maps imposed by global powers and assert their interest, concerns, and priorities of the Pacific Island countries. So with that being said, I will give the virtual microphone to Simone, and she will answer the second part of the question. Thank you.
Okay, so how can Pacific Island leaders utilize this narrative to resist the pressures of great power competition, particularly between China and the West? So Pacific Island leaders can use the Blue Pacific idea to avoid being controlled by big powers like China and Western countries such as the United States and Australia. According to Cabo Taulaka 2021, cartographers have used maps to identify and claim control over geographical, economic, political, and social spaces. Consequently, maps are effective tools for projecting power. The Blue Pacific frames the region as one, and thus giving Pacific leaders the standing ground to shift away from the pressures of China and the West. So from this, we have come up with 3 points that the Blue Pacific promotes in order for Pacific Island leaders to utilize the narrative. Firstly is unity. The Blue Pacific allows the institutions such as Pacific Islands Forum to be established. The institution, contributes towards strengthening bargaining powers when faced with external pressures in the Pacific. Leaders of the Pacific Island nations must contribute ideas and efforts to strengthen regional institutions such as the Pacific Islands Forum, as I mentioned. And according to Cabo Taulaka 2021, this gives space for Pacific Islands to freely negotiate with the major powers more effectively. And it also, from unity, we gain solidarity, which leaders can use this collective identity to act as a united bloc. Secondly, it focuses on climate change as the main threat and not military competition. The Bow Declaration supports this broad idea of security, and the Blue Pacific narrative secures security cooperation amongst Pacific Islands with a focus on climate change rather than climate security, rather than military security. And thirdly, it protects sovereignty. So Pacific countries can choose their own partners without being forced to take sides. Rather than choosing China and Western countries, the narrative allows island countries to strategize and work with both sides, strengthening their military and trade systems. The Pacific Islands are often required to follow a friends to all, enemies to none approach. In that way, they can welcome help and investment from both China and Western countries, but avoid tying themselves closely to anyone This way, they can gain benefits of working with many partners while staying independent and avoiding being caught with big power rivalries. In this way, our home, our rules, and it also helps us to reclaim our maritime space by focusing on the blue continent, where leaders assert control over their ocean resources and security instead of letting outside powers define the region. So, in conclusion, or before I conclude, I would like to also mention that the Blue Pacific is a narrative and also a strategy which Pacific Islands can use to resist the pressures of great power competition by promoting unity, collective diplomacy, and a strong focus on regional priorities such as climate change. And to conclude, when Pacific nations act together and put their shared interests first, they are better able to protect their sovereignty, maintain neutrality, and avoid being used in rivalry between China and the West. So unity remains their greatest strength, and the Blue Pacific is one way to promote that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Group 5, and thank you, Joe and Simone, for a very interesting presentation. And we have 2 more groups to go, Group 2, and then we'll listen to Group 7. So Group 2, the virtual microphone is yours. We have Fiona and Anne-Marie representing Group 2.
Representing Group 2 will present on the statement and question. Yagura argues that PNG is trying to balance its economic engagement with China while relying on Australia and the US for security cooperation, reflected in the idea that your enemy is our enemy. I mean, your enemy is not our enemy. So the question we'll be presenting on is, how does this balancing strategy affect PNG's security decision-making, and what risk could emerge for PNG's strategic autonomy if great power competition intensifies in the Pacific? So moving on, we break the presentation into 3 parts. For the first one, what is the balancing strategy? For the second one, how does it affect security decision-making, and what risk emerge for strategic autonomy if rivalry intensifies? So moving on, for the balancing strategy, what is balancing strategy? PNG's balancing strategy is rooted in its post-independence doctrine of universalism, which is friends to all and enemies to none. So after the independence in 1975, Michael Somare, under his leadership, diversified diplomatic ties beyond Australia and engaged states across ideological divides, including China. So the 1976 joint communique with Beijing formalized relations and embedded diversification within PNG's sovereign policy. So in the contemporary period, which is now, this has evolved into issue-based pragmatism. China is framed primarily as an economic and development partner through projects such as the Ramuniko mine, concessional loans, and participation in the BRI. So Prime Minister Peter O'Neill in 2018, under his time as Prime Minister, his decision to join the BRI just reinforced China's role as an alternative development partner. So meanwhile, PNG continues to rely on Australia and the US for defense cooperation and regional security support. So as Prime Minister James Marape's statement that your enemy is not our enemy, this statement reflects this effort to avoid alignment while maximizing the national interest. However, intensifying US-China competition is placing increasing strain on this balancing posture, particularly in the security domain. So my friends will further elaborate.
PNG's balancing strategy strongly influences how security decisions are made. Security choices are now tied not only to defense needs, but also through geopolitical signaling, economic interdependence, and institutional weaknesses. Okay, so our first point, security agreements are no longer judged only by national defense needs. They are also judged based on how other major powers will react. For example, discussions around defense partnerships like the Puk-Puk Defense Treaty and China's proposal for a similar security agreement with Solomon Islands have attracted public and diplomatic attention. Australia's addition to a China-related condition in its rugby league partnership with PNG also shows how even non-security agreements can become politically sensitive. These examples show that PNG security decisions are increasingly shaped by international rivalry rather than just local security concerns. Our second point is economic dependence as constrains strategic options. China's investment in PNG's mining sector, especially the Ramoniko project, is one of the largest foreign investments in the country. While it helps generate export income, it has also raised concerns about environmental damage, unequal development, and limited benefits for local communities. Because of this economic and educational influence, PNG may feel pressured to maintain good relations with China. If PNG strengthens security ties with Australia or the United States in ways that China dislikes, it could risk losing investment, loans, or educational opportunities. This makes security policy closely linked to economic survival. Onto our third point, institutional weakness limits strategic control. PNG's government systems sometimes struggle with coordination, oversight, and corruption risks. The Wapusong controversy involving alleged corruption linked to a Chinese company is an example of how poor transparency can create security and government risks. When institutions are weak, security decisions can become short-term and politically driven rather than focused on long-term national interests. This reduces PNG's ability to manage competing foreign interests effectively. So if major power competition in the Pacific becomes stronger, PNG's independence in decision-making could face several risks. Coercive pressure under economic stress. The 1999 Taiwan diplomatic incident showed how economic pressure can shape foreign policy decisions. PNG briefly considered changing diplomatic recognition in exchange for financial support, but later reversed the decision after pressure from China and Australia. This shows that when the economy is under stress, foreign policy options can also become limited. Similar pressure could happen in security matters in the future. Number 2, collapse of economic security separation. Currently, PNG tends to treat relationships separately. For China, mainly economic cooperation, and Australia and the United States, mainly security cooperation. However, Pacific geopolitics is increasingly being viewed through strategic competition. If economic projects start being viewed as security threats by other countries, PNG may need to be forced to justify development decisions based on geopolitics rather than development needs. Onto our final point, strategic instrumentalization of geography. Both China and Australia see PNG's location as strategically important. As rivalry increases, PNG could be used for surveillance, logistics, or military positioning. If PNG is valued mainly because of its location, its development priorities could be influenced by foreign security interests rather than domestic needs. This could reduce national autonomy.
Okay, in conclusion, overall, Jaeger's analysis shows that PNG's balancing strategy is a practical foreign policy approach that allows the country, PNG, to benefit from both China and its traditional security partners, which is Australia and the US. However, as US-China competition intensifies in the Pacific, this strategy is becoming harder to maintain. So economic dependence, external strategic pressure, and weak institutional capacity all limits PNG's ability to fully control its foreign and security decisions. So moving forward, PNG's strategic autonomy will depend on strengthening domestic institutions, improving transparency, and developing clearer long-term national security and development priorities. Thank you. That's the end of our presentation.
Hey, thank you, Group 2, and thank you, Fiona and Marie, for sharing with us your answers to the given question. And you've organized your presentation well. I hope your peers have taken note of what you have shared with them, and if any questions, comments, we can further discuss in our discussion forum for this week. Let's move on to the final group, group number 7, represented by Cosmas and Penuel. Cosmas, Penuel, please go ahead.
Class, me and Penuel will be presenting on a seminar discussion questions. Yakira highlights that while China PNG relations have expanded through investment, education, diplomacy, and development cooperation, they also create governance and transparency concerns that feed public suspicions. So our discussion is divided into 2 questions. First question reads, how do these concerns shape PNG's perceptions of China as a potential security threat? And the second question is, what policy safeguards would PNG strengthen to protect sovereignty and national interest while still engaging China? So I will just state a brief introduction. According to Yakura 2025, PNG-China relations date back 5 decades through the guidance of PNG's universalism principle. The principles that certain ideas, values, and rights apply to everyone, everywhere, regardless of their culture, race, religions, or location. PNG decided to expand its diplomatic relations beyond dependency on Australia. Over the years, through PNG-China relations, PNG received major support from China in terms of education programs, infrastructures, financial support, economic support, and health funding, which displays China's support. One example is the Belt and Road Initiatives or the Chinese government scholarship programs, and there are some more. However, there were concerns raised regarding China's involvement with PNG. According to Yagiora 2025, balancing issues such as the uneven distributions of development and weak governance have provoked speculations in China's investment in Papua New Guinea. So thank you, and I hand it over to second presenter.
Moving on, the question one of these concerns such as China of the potential security threat. According to Yale algorithm, 20 things concern three and exposed to the China initiatives and industry. There's some most concerned pressure. For example, the normally for R&D starting from the Chinese investment symbolizes China however concerned for those residents regarding students that the education sector. Chinese supporting before the students go to start abroad to Chinese scholarship programs. However, the language barrier be a consultant to engage in all instruction the learning process. Now, another thing is local business trust. Most people talk about Chinese. This poses a significant security concern for business. Moving on to question 2. What policy safeguards the PNG strengthen protect small business are still engaging in China. According to AU 2025, one of the ways to protect children as well as this PhD professor revives China that was already there. Generally, yes, PhDs about the country that was established in 19. Yeah. It is a very cooperation, market access. PNG in general good traders. Yeah. Good economic but it can be required. First of all, and before actually revive policy that is therefore reviewed in 2025. And honestly, new white paper policy strategy. This white paper policy 2025. It states on the certain pillars to start and read allocation to effective market location the department different this can actually be part of the suggested policy specifically for China PNG relations in terms of protecting the sovereignty of Papua New Guinea in regards to security. That is our mission in terms of taking from Negro 2025 years of China.
Okay, so Mtasola, Cosmas, and Penwell. Penwell, unfortunately, we couldn't hear the last part because of microphone issues or some disturbance to the audio. But if you could share what you have shared with us in our discussion forum, then it will help your peers note what you have stated and then share their comment or their questions in the discussion forum for further discussion. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our presentation for today. And I thank all the group members for representing your 7 different groups to share answers to the assigned questions with us. And to continue the discussion on security. So we started off by defining what security is, and then this is a case study of a security issue, the China threat or the China narrative that is derived from the China threat theory. Many scholars have now talked about or questioned whether China is a threat to both developing and developed countries. And we've started this week and we'll continue discussion next week. And the purpose is for you to look at what other scholars have written about PNG and other countries in the Pacific and globally as well. And then for you as future policymakers and decision makers to decide whether China is really a threat to us, our sovereignty, our way of life, or is it just more of a Western narrative and China to us as Papua New Guineans? China is a developing partner. We need China. We need to work hand in hand with China to develop our country. So that's for you to decide. When you go through all these readings, always keep that at the back of your mind, and then you can decide whether you think China is a credible development partner or China is a threat to our way of life and what we're doing in Chinese entrepreneurs or business people, an economic threat to our economic survival or economic independence, so on and so forth. So we'll stop here. We'll continue the discussion in our next seminar presentation. But once again, thank you everyone, and You will have a pleasant day.